Do you reckon we're in this funny pocket of time generally where at one point everything was in person and then everything was virtual, and now I guess we're kind of hybrid a little bit? Can we take the best bits of all those virtual experiences we had for a couple of years and then blend them together with in-person experiences that people crave, so we can continue to innovate in healthcare settings and create these environments that aren't just super efficient, but they're people-centric? So they're optimized for the people within them, whether they're the patients receiving the care within the facility or the clinicians or the admin staff, the employees, the contractors, the people working within them. It's an interesting topic to consider. Well, with me today on the show is Jerry Kennard, CEO of a healthcare and workplace design fit-out business called Evoke Projects. And he's also founder of the Practice Success Collective, which is a network of experts to holistically support practice owners in their journey of starting or purchasing their own practice and then growing their business to achieve success, whatever that might look like for them. In this episode, we talk about the priorities and trends that we're seeing within clinic fit-outs in Australia, what this whole concept of a people-centric practice actually is, the importance of taking a more holistic approach to the physical design of a clinic, and a lot more too. Collaboration starts with a conversation, Team Health Tech. Let's make it happen. This is Talking Health Tech with me, Peter Birch, featuring content and community about technology in healthcare. Jerry Kennard, it's been a hot minute since we spoke on the podcast. It's great to have you here on the show again. Thanks for joining, mate.
Thank you, Pete. And really excited to be back on. It's been a while.
Yeah. Well, I was looking at the back catalogue just before we pressed record, and the last time we had you here on the podcast was in April 21, I believe.
Okay, wow.
So I think it was episode 131. And
and what are you up to now?
Yeah, this will be 300 and something. 300 when this gets released, 330, 340. I was
going to say there's been a bit of water under the bridge since then.
That's right.
And quite a bit for you.
Yeah. And looking back here, it looks like when we spoke back in April 21, we spoke about the impact of COVID on clinics and the importance of good physical design for practice success. But maybe, and people can go back and listen a bit more about who you are and what you do there, but perhaps give it a bit more context. Tell us what you've been up to since we last spoke on the podcast and what's keeping you busy now.
Yeah, thinking back to April 21, quite a bit. So, it's interesting with COVID. Obviously, it was reasonably, I'm trying to think April 21, whether we'd been through how many lockdowns, but
I think we're in the midst of on and off roundabout.
Yeah. And I think everyone was in a bit of a quandary as to what that meant for the physical space, what that meant long term. I don't know about you, but when COVID hit, you sort of thought, 6 months we'll be out of this. And, 2 years in, 3 years in, we're still...
I'll have to find the picture, but we were in the office and there's a Post-it note where we all wrote our guesses of how long it is until we come back. Okay. And I was at the top. I said 2 weeks until we come back. So I got that a little wrong.
The ultimate optimist.
Someone did say 12 months on that, and I'm like, well, yo, what do you mean? But,
come on, you pessimist.
Yeah. Anyway, here we are.
Yeah. So thinking back to then, it was very early days. There was a lot of temporary measures, I would say, put in place more just to protect staff. And obviously we didn't know what the long term was. We didn't hardly even knew what the disease was and the repercussions. But I think over the course of the next 2 years, and I think things have settled down to be a bit more realistic in what's required. But I think what probably has been the best thing that's come out of it all is really it's given a boost to the tech industry when it comes to systems and processes and technology that's really allowed, instead of having to expand, just an example, instead of having to expand the size of waiting areas, just put in a patient engagement software that allows people to come when their appointment's ready, go off, have a coffee, do what you need to do. And I think that's been probably one of the many silver linings of COVID that we've seen, is that it's pushed people into embracing tech. Because at the end of the day, real estate's expensive. It's expensive exercise to fit out. Why inflate the amount of space you need when there's technology that can help you be more efficient in the way you run your practice? And people often say to us, like, what's the big deal about you do fit outs? Where's technology in that? It really works. It's hand in hand. And there's so much when it comes to the efficient running of a practice from a spatial perspective, but also the technology piece is absolutely crucial.
Absolutely. It's funny because you think of that example that you gave about instead of increasing the size of your waiting room, how can you have a patient engagement tool so I guess getting people to do some things in like outside of the clinic, is that what you mean? And
Yeah. So there's two aspects to that. You either have it on an app on your phone. I don't know if you've been to a GP and used HotDoc, but that's a good example. And secondly, if you're not an app user on your phone, you can, when you actually enter the clinic, most people will have a concierge type login to use the app in the clinic. And from our perspective, I think it is the way forward. We need to be seeing less of these big long reception desks and more of the concierge feel. It should be like the ultimate in customer experience. The patient experience who doesn't like a valet experience when it comes to feeling a bit special?
I'm interested too, like the clinics that you work with and doing fit outs. When I think of, say, your GP clinics around Australia, there's certainly different demographics, those that would be in areas that might be predominantly bulk billing and try and get through as many patients as possible, and they might be optimized for efficiency, versus those that might be in more affluent areas that might be optimizing more for providing that kind of valet or concierge type service. Are you finding that it's either one or the other, or are there a bit of a mix of everything now?
No, interesting question. I would say that it's probably got a lot. Okay, the finishes of a practice are very much determined by the target market and the demographic. When it comes to the look and feel and that emotional journey of, well, when I say emotional journey, the environmental how far you go with cost definitely plays a part. But when it comes to technology and embracing things like, concierge logins and patient waiting, patient engagement, I think, to be honest, it's across the board, because practices, it's improving the way practices operate, whether they're in a fast-paced environment or whether they're in a higher socioeconomic environment where people want more personalised service. To me, and I think to the general public, that personalised service is potentially through an app anyway. So I think whichever side of the fence you're on, or wherever you are on the social demographic scale, I think the requirement for that type of technology is the same. So to answer, that's probably a long way to answer your question, but to answer your question, I don't think there's a lot between them. It's probably more in the finishes and the level of specification of the actual design of the practice.
Yeah, okay. Look, and I look at what you've been doing since we last spoke as well, just generally. There's, of course, the stuff with Evoke, but the Practice Success Collective, I've seen a lot about that recently, and that's been keeping you busy. What's that all about?
Yes. Yeah, I think I'm a glutton for punishment on that one. What started off as a bit of a, I think, again, that was another silver lining of COVID for me and for our team. What came out of COVID was, hey, let's do something together with some other collaborating businesses that service the industry. Due to the COVID sort of situation, we went, hey, let's do something. Let's give back to the community. Let's, provide something a bit educational. Has turned into quite the education piece when it comes to online summits. So we now are doing 5 online summits a year.
5 of them? I thought I was going pretty hard with 4, but
I know. That's why I said glutton for punishment.
Yeah, right.
So we're kicking off at the end of this month with a startup summit, which is non-specific to any speciality. So there's certain things when you're starting a clinic, when it comes to accounting, legal, structure, marketing strategy, through to location strategy with your property and finance, there's certain aspects that are, I wouldn't say completely generic, but they're valid for all specialities, whether you're a specialist or whether you're a GP or a dental clinic wanting to open up. So that's aimed at aspiring practice owners. So the oncoming generation, if you like, of practice owners doesn't mean that you have to be young to have your first practice, not at all. And I suppose the whole purpose behind Practice Success Collective and why we started it was really to give aspiring practice owners and existing practice owners access to a talent pool of experts that they need in order to start, grow, and succeed in their business. We often laugh about it. It's the cradle to the grave concept. Start with the end in mind, begin with the end in mind. Where do you want to be in 10, 20 years? And what success look like for you as an aspiring practice owner or a practice owner? And how can we help you get there? And I've got I'm very grateful for the team of advisors and experts that have come on board the Practice Success Collective, because obviously we couldn't do it without them all. And yeah, so the first one is a startup, and then we have 4 growth summits through the year, and they're very specific. So there's a GP summit, there'll be a dental summit, a specialist summit, and a veterinary summit.
Oh, cool.
So a lot in the pipeline. 2023 is going to be huge for us, for Practice Success Collective. Yeah, and obviously there's experts that are very keen on one or two of those specific avenues. And it really comes down to who can add the most value for our mutual client base.
Interesting. I think it's great too. I mean, when you're coming from the perspective of an organization that does fit outs, as you say, but you place a lot of emphasis both on the technology side, but now you're with the whole Practice Success Collective, it's about the entirety of running the practice. It sounds like you've got this very holistic approach to doing things. That must be important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and look, I think that comes back to, actually, we were discussing this very topic at our offsite strategy with the leadership team this year, and we were going, well, what is our why? Why does Evoke exist? And to be honest, yes, it is about improving the well-being of occupants in the physical space through design and fit out, but it's actually now bigger than that. Like, it's about how can we help practice owners succeed? And we just, as Evoke, we play one part in that process, one part in that path to success. It's all very well building someone a fit out and looks amazing. It might be the best practice in town, but if they don't have access to the people they need in their corner, like that old analogy of the right people in the right seats on the bus, and that can be advisors for the practice owner, then it's not going to succeed. I think we often talk about people-centric practices, and there's probably, fair to say, there's always been an emphasis on patient care and the patient experience, which is obviously paramount in private practice, in any healthcare. But where there's probably, I would say, I'm careful to blanket it, but where there's probably been a lack is in actually focusing on the team that looks after those patients. There's been some sayings, look after your team and they'll look after your clients. And that's exactly what we're talking about.
Got you.
And so I think to really, truly create a people-centric practice, it's got to be about the team as well as the patients. And then that flows through, like you were just saying, it's not just about the physical space. It's about the tech. It's about the systems and processes. And then it's about the behaviors and the strategy and the leadership, in order to create a people-centric culture.
And that's what you mean about people-centric practices, because that can, sometimes we talk about whether it's patient centricity or people centricity. It can be a term that's bandied around, but it's really about serving the needs of the people who are operating within the practice and delivering care, but also for the patients as well. Because from a people perspective, that includes the physical location that they're in, but also the technology that they're using too. So serving those needs, and then the rest of it follows from there.
Yeah, and it really goes hand in hand, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how nice the space is if you don't have a team that's pumping and that loves coming to work every day to serve your patients, then you won't have a practice. I think, to be honest, probably the biggest pain point of all practice owners in this current market, doesn't matter what speciality is your thing, it's attracting and retaining top talent. And I think how do you stand out in this market as an employer of choice? And yes, you can say, if it was just put our Evoke hat on, yes, you need a great place to work, but it's more than that. It's about having the leadership and the behaviours, and I think, when an aspiring practice owner comes to us, that's one of the first things we question them. Have you got a business coach? Have you got an accountant? Have you got a lawyer? You need all these things. And often the legal team and the accounting, they think of first, great, but, have you got a strategy? Where do you want to be? How are you going to grow? And people, if people aren't at the heart of it, it won't succeed. It's as simple as that, like whether we like it or not.
Absolutely. Thinking then back to the physical presence for a second, and, talking about that there might be clinic owners or those in a practice setting that might be looking at, well, what does it mean in a current environment where potentially some patient care or some engagement might happen virtually and then some in person? And I know organizations with corporate offices, and everyone's facing similar kind of questions. Are there any examples of whether it's optimizations or clever use of space or things that are kind of on trend, whatever it might be, particularly within a clinic setting that you're seeing that are making a physical space best contribute to success of a practice?
Yeah. So I suppose what you're really saying is, now we live in a hybrid world. How do you bring it all together between tech and, in-person patient care? And great question. I think it opens up that whole topic around mass personalization as well. We can't just anymore. It's not good enough anymore to just take it for granted that people want in person. I mean, it's one of those things that it's about understanding your market and your demographic and what works best for them, and then being able to offer the ultimate solution. And so if that is including technology, which I think we're going to see more and more of, are the clinics set up with the infrastructure to actually facilitate that in the best way possible? When it comes to video conferencing, when it comes to having those spaces, and that then, I think, to answer your question, comes down to if you're seeing patients on a regular basis via technology, what's the point of taking up a huge clinic, a huge space for a consult room just to do technology? So I think where we're seeing it go is that we'll see more of these smaller spaces, a mix of spaces that gives flexibility, and rather than having designated consult rooms just to the one doctor per se, it is a shift, and it's a shift in thinking and a shift in culture. But I think it is the way forward.
From my own experience then as well, sometimes it can feel really hard when you think of a physical space where, there could be a clinic owner who's like, well, I'm setting up my waiting room. I want to make sure it's clean and tidy, or, a consult room, and I've got to optimize for space. And I don't know, I'll put this lounge here. I reckon it looks pretty good. It can feel very subjective, or, it's a lot based on, but, a lot of us are scientific or kind of factual people. Have you got any hard and fast, whether it's rules or principles or kind of guiding lights that perhaps you use that are more than just, this is what Jerry reckons might look pretty good in your clinic?
Yeah, no, good question. Because, and I think that comes back to when you're looking at design principles and looking at different, I suppose you might call it methodologies when it comes to how to design the practice. And probably the first thing to understand is there's obviously spatial design, and which is probably the focus of most design companies. How do we get the space to be functional? And that's absolutely important. And how to get it to be the most efficient and what have you. But the second part of design that we put a lot of emphasis on is the environmental design of the practice, or the emotional design of the practice. So when I talk about emotional design, we're talking about the emotional journey that every human's on as they enter that practice, whether it be the team or whether it be a patient. We're all on an emotional journey. Now, obviously, it's probably more emotional for the patient, normally speaking, but our surroundings have a huge impact on us as humans, and there's nothing we can do or say to change that. You look at environment from the perspective of a plant, for instance, you can't expect a plant to grow in poor conditions. It's the same for us. And even the toughest of us, the environment that we live, work, or play in has a huge impact. And the reason I say all that is getting back to your question around, is there any standards? Is there any proven strategies? One that our design team embrace is the Well Building Institute framework. So it's a standard, it's a standard around looking at it holistically on how can spaces improve the well-being of the occupants. It's not just about the physical space. So the standard looks at, there's like 10 key concepts within the standard. They include air, water, nourishment, light, just trying to think of them all, movement, mind, community. So all these things that are actually have been identified as, and researched and proven that can have a massive impact on the effect of the space, of the environment on our well-being. So when it comes to, you say, well, what effect can you have on nourishment? Well, true, there's certain concepts that we can have less of an effect on, but it doesn't mean that we can't promote what the standard's trying to represent and what the standard's trying to promote. And that is to, some of the things might be such as encouraging healthy eating habits. One thing we see in practices all the time is staff areas are reduced to an absolute minimum. I think you probably know what I'm talking about. Often and granted, with practice, setting up a practice, you want to maximize your revenue generating spaces. And we totally get that. But at the end of the day, if you're thinking about setting up a people-centric practice and putting your team first in order for your patients to have the ultimate experience, then they need looking after, they need investing in. Now, that's very easier said than done, because when you look at, well, I could get another consult room, I could increase my revenue by X. I suppose the key thing to remember there is, are you going to keep your staff? Are you going to attract and retain the top talent that you need? This is where some of this, something like nourishment, where you go, well, that doesn't really have an impact because you can't install something or you can't build something to help with that. But indirectly, yes. Light's another important one, natural light, maximising natural light. Again, depending on the space, you got to work with the cards you've been dealt. And that's, sometimes that's in a shopping centre with very little natural light. So there's strategies that the design team have to really dig into and get creative in order to compensate for the lack, if there is a lack. So we have a bit of a framework where we've almost, I wouldn't say dumbed down, but tried to streamline, take it from a very science-based framework to what are the practical things that we can implement through the design process that practice owners can really implement easily, that can make a big impact for the least cost. There's certain aspects to it in the standard that could cost a lot, and obviously that's not going to be for everyone. But having said that, we always say, look, there's strategies that you can implement. They're backed by science and they're proven to make an impact. Case in point is biophilic design. So when it comes to looking at the mind and the effect that nature has on us as humans and our innate connection with nature, and that's a simple thing that can be done at no extra cost and it has a huge impact on that whole emotional aspect of design.
Well, yeah, back to the point around that you mentioned too about can you carve out 3/4 of the tea room to then, create another consult room or a nurse, consult room. And on paper, that sounds great. You could see X amount more of patients and bring in a whatever. But man, I know from my own experience working in clinics and the amount of conversations I had in the lunchroom and the time that you spend in there, and you need the breakout area. And in the smaller clinics where they didn't have that kind of stuff. It has an impact, and you've got a lot of people who are non-clinical often but even the clinical people, if they've not got a place to fall back to, by trying to overreach, you'll end up.
Absolutely. And, I think it's fair to say, and I think everyone that's probably listening to this podcast, we're in industry, we're talking about industries where people are working long hours, people are putting in a lot of hard work. There's a shortage of staff, shortage of team. So in the breaks they do have, we need to maximize the rebound and the re-energization of the team in that short space of time they've got. And again, natural light's not always available, but there's ways to compensate for things like that.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, I'm sure that'll give a lot of people, in the clinic owners, that even practice managers working within facilities, looking at how they might, make those transformational changes or even little small tweaks around the site. And no doubt there'll be resources available through Evoke that they can access and have a look at through, which we'll put on the show notes of this episode. But lastly, Jerry, what's going to keep you busy between now and when we next catch up on the podcast? What's on the horizon?
I think with Practice Success, I won't be exactly looking for stuff to do. And look, I think, to be honest, that's really where my passion is. Yes, we do design and fit out the ultimate space for a practice owner. But nothing gives me more joy than seeing aspiring practice owners set up for success from day one with the people they need in their corner that are going to help them and support them and help them grow. Because at the end of the day, if it's the first time you've ever set up a practice, you don't know what you don't know, right? So I think talking and the question often comes up is like, well, who do you talk to first? Well, it's basically everyone, because you need your accounting, you need your legal, you need your marketing strategy. When it comes to who's the demographic you're serving, who's the target market, and then that affects your property strategy and where you're going to put your practice. So it really is all entwined. And I think that's really at the crux of what Practice Success is about, is giving you access to the people. If you haven't got access to someone, then there's people that we know, like, and trust that we can hand on heart recommend that will help you in that area. It's not that everyone has to be utilized by everyone on the team. And I think that's probably the key. The kicker there is that this is about helping practice owners succeed. This is not about what's in it for us and how much can we get out of it. This is a way we can give back to the community that we serve. Yeah, I think that's my year pretty much.
Yeah. No, doing it for the right reasons. And we'll put the link for Practice Success Collective in the show notes as well, and in the comments for people to have a look at and find when the next, virtual event is, based on when they listen or watch this podcast episode. So, Jerry, mate, I appreciate you coming on and having a chat. Good luck with all the events and the work that you've got lined up. You're a busy guy, but deserve all the success that comes your way. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Pete. It's been excellent to catch up again, and looking forward to the next time. Maybe we can reconvene in 12 months.
Yeah, sounds good. Speak to you then.
For more content and community about technology and healthcare, visit talkinghealthtech.com.